as long as we didn't get into a place where one of the returned service graduates, men, had been, I decided that Whakatane would be the place for me, because there was no physiotherapist at Whakatane. The medical superintendent of the hospital had one house surgeon, a chief executive officer and a matron, and they ran 4 wards. And they had a nursing home where the girls trained. And when I arrived on the door, the medical superintendent shook my hand and said, you're a physiotherapist? I said, yes. He said, oh, well, I'll have to find something for you to do. I didn't know what physiotherapists do. So he had me changing plasters, taking stitches out, doing all sorts of things. It was a wonderful training for a young physiotherapist. As time went by, in 1954, that was in our 3rd year after graduation, Miss Hickling came to New Zealand at the invitation of the New Zealand Society and conducted a course. If I remember correctly, it was held in Wellington. And she was a Dr. Syriac's graduate, and she discussed for the first time with us the disc theory. That was the cause of spinal problems, was the disc. And Dr. Syriac's recommended that the disc be manipulated. The group that had been to Auckland and seen Dr. Manel in action were a little bit horrified at Miss Hickling's handling techniques, because they were quite coarse and strong. Absolutely full traction and rotation. They were strong techniques, not the type of techniques that we had been using in practice. But however, the theory was exactly what we wanted, because we hadn't had that spinal theory as students. Further along the line, Stanley Paris in the early 60s had gained an overseas scholarship with the Workers' Compensation Board to tour the world and find out the various methods that people throughout the world were using to treat spinal injuries, because spinal injuries were the things that were standing out very strongly with the Workers' Compensation Board as to be prolific amongst workers. Well, Stanley came back to New Zealand, and he'd been everywhere. He'd been to chiropractic colleges, he'd been to Sweden, he'd been to the London School of Osteopathy, he'd been all sorts of places. And he wrote a magnificent book in which he mentioned the fact there were such things as accessory movements, which had been something that we hadn't thought of. We'd thought of end range, but didn't realise that joints have an accessory range, which opened a whole new door to us. And Stanley had wonderful hands, and he learnt from the Scandinavians especially how to use his hands. And we all wished to have the same handling techniques as Stanley. As a result of Stanley's work, a group of us decided that we'd like to get together and have a manual therapy group. It didn't have to be a manipulative therapy group, but a manual therapy group. And a number of people travelled overseas as a result of Stanley's speakings. I think Brian Mulligan did a tour of Scandinavia especially and came back and said, these are the people we should be talking to. And we decided to form a group and on a regular basis meet in Wellington to discuss different methods of treating people in, well, mainly spinal manipulative care, and later on Freddie, of course, expounded extremity care. So the whole body became involved now. To such an extent that in 1969 we decided there was only one thing to do, and that was to invite Freddie Carltonborn from Norway himself to come to New Zealand, give us a 1-week course of all those people that used to travel to Wellington 2 or 3 times a year for this meeting of people of like thought. Freddie came in 1969 and made a marvellous impact upon us, but he said we'd done the wrong thing. Instead of having him come to teach techniques, we should have had Dr. Syriacs there first to explain the theory, and then have Carlton afterwards. So nothing for it. Freddie came in 1969, we had to have Dr. Syriacs. And so in 1970, Dr. Syriacs came. At this time in the 1970s, the chiropractors were very strong, had a very strong political input into Parliament, and were moving very strongly to have full medical rights to the public, state-funded. Well, now this caused a great deal of medical alarm, because there were groups of physical medicine doctors in New Zealand who certainly in practice didn't want to see chiropractors get full financial rights. We were involved in the Chiropractic Commission, especially Don McKenzie, because he had been a very keen member of our group. Even though blind, he had wonderful hands. He was also a great organiser, so that he was able to organise a defence on behalf of physiotherapists against the chiropractors. And we found then that the medical profession was starting to lean towards us a little bit, because they would be prepared to accept some medically acceptable group who would only accept patients on referral from medical men, as opposed to a separate group that had the full autonomy that the medical profession had. So we had the backing of the medical profession at that time. But we were only a very small group of people. Internationally, things had been moving along, and the WCPT meeting in London, a group of physiotherapists that attended the WCPT meeting thought that it would be a good thing to try and get manual therapy groups going in each country and amongst physiotherapists. So Dr. Syriacs was very keen on that. He was keen on physiotherapists doing manipulative work. And I think at that meeting, Rob McKenzie was the representative representing us. So that's going way back into the 1970s.